Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It's me, Vijay, back with another book review. Today I'm going to be reviewing the book called When Breath Becomes Air, written by Paul Kalanithi. Paul Kalanithi was a rising neurosurgeon at Stanford. He had written many articles in many medical journals, and this book details his experience of going through cancer. The end note is written by his wife, who talks about his final days, how he suffers due to his cancer, but he also is able to enjoy the small pleasures of life. The book starts out telling us about Paul Kalanithi's normal life. Paul Kalanithi being the chief resident at Stanford University, and he's just 8 months away from becoming the attending professor for neurosurgery at Harvard, which is a very high paying and esteemed profession. And at this time, he starts having backaches, chest pains, and different conditions. Paul Kalanithi thinks that they'll just stop and they won't happen again. But these conditions keep coming back to him. And so he decides to actually go and see a doctor to find out what's wrong with him. And at this point, he gets to know that he has lung cancer. And the doctors at that point didn't know how long he had to live, because that type of cancer was reached 35. It was very rare in such young patients. So they didn't know how much time he had to live. So he could have 5 months or he could have 10 years. So Paul Kalanithi decides to take a step back and to understand what he has done with his life and to see what steps he can take further. And he wants to enjoy the small pleasures of life with the time remaining, all the time that he has left. And he writes this book talking about his life experiences, how he goes through the experience of going through cancer and the emotional toil of having illnesses. He talks about how he first decided that he's going to become a neurosurgeon. Paul Kalanithi's father was a doctor, and his brothers too had taken medical professions. But Paul Kalanithi didn't want to follow in the footsteps of his family members. He wanted to do something different. He always had a flair for writing, and he really enjoyed reading and literature. So he had a really good profile, and he was able to get into Stanford for undergraduate. And he decided to take literature as his English literature as his major. And along with that, after reading a book about the brain and about neurosurgery, he decided that he's going to also take neurobiology as his minor. In Stanford, he gets a lot of friends, he gets a lot of inputs, and he sees the world around him. And he continues his passion for reading, and he also finds out more about life. And at this point, he finds out that he does want to take medicine, not just because it's a lucrative career or it has good pay or it's an esteemed career, but because he feels that it would be challenging. He feels that he wants to take a career where he can understand how people go through emotions in real life, how people go through the toil of illnesses and pain. In other careers, people see others at their best. But in medicine, you see others at their worst, at their weakest. And Paul Kalanithi felt that he could train himself to do something that would have a change in society. He pursued his MD, and that is where he met his wife. He married her, and they had a very nice time together. After this, he pursues his residency at Stanford, and he slowly rises up the ranks and becomes the chief resident. And he's just 8 months away from becoming the attending professor, but he gets cancer. So he decides to write this book detailing his experiences. It shows how he, from the perspective of a doctor, has to change his view, his perspective to that of a patient. But this is very hard for him because he wants to know what's best for him. He wants to know all the best options that he has for cures, for ways to alleviate his symptoms. But the doctor who is helping him tells him to take a step back, tells him to relax, and tells him to just become the patient. And he decides to do this, just that. And after a few months, after about a year of going through chemotherapy, he decides to go back to neurosurgery. And he spends, and though he has lots of pain and he's suffering a lot, he still decides to toil away, and he decides that he is going to get that position of chief attending surgeon. And in the end, he finally does get it. But by that time, the work and the cancer has taken such a toll on him, he's not able to go on any further. And after achieving all that, he feels that life is very abrupt. He achieved all that he could in his career. He had a very good wife, and he also and his wife gave birth to his daughter, and he was able to cherish those small moments with his daughter. But at that point, we may think that life is going good, but at one point, life may just change. So this shows us that life is very unexpected. Along with this gives us an insight, this book gives us an insight into the medical profession, the hard work, the effort that requires into becoming a doctor, and the skills required to become a neurosurgeon or a doctor. You don't just need to be good at doing procedures, medical procedures, but you also need to be good at handling emotions. Because the amount of emotion, the stress you see on this job is a lot, and you have to be able to cope with this. So this book was very poignant and it was very heartbreaking. And by the end, his experience of being a medical professional and having cancer shows us that his life was very exemplary, but life is very abrupt. I really enjoyed this book, and if you enjoyed this book review as much as you're reading this book, be sure to subscribe and like. I'll see you all in another video.